Hello everyone, welcome back to a new video. For today's video I am doing the Q&A that I talked about in December in my book announcement video. If you haven't watched that, I highly recommend you watch that before this because I will go over things that I did not go over in that video. So if you want to know all the details, you should watch that first and then this video. But today's video I am answering the questions that you asked under that video and also the questions that you asked on my Instagram. And my Instagram is of course linked in the description, and I will go over the things that has to do with the publishing first. So there wasn't very specific questions about the contract in itself, but people were asking, or you guys, some of you guys were asking and wondering about the process from sending in my full manuscript. My process, I guess you could say, is that I sent them a pitch and they wanted to read the full manuscript, so I sent them the full manuscript. I waited and then I got back from them. So this email will of course look different from person to person and publisher to publisher. In my case it went something like, we really like the idea and we want to publish this, and they didn't send the proposal or the sketch of a contract that I would sign. They didn't send that before I would confirm that I wanted to look on the contract and wanted to think on it more. So they proposed to me how they wanted to do it and how the editing would look like and how me working with them would look like. So they proposed that in the email, the first email that they got back to me, and then I got back to them and said that yeah, I would love to publish my book with you and I would like to look on the contract. So they sent me a sketch of the contract, so there's nothing filled in of, like, for example, the royalty, and there's not even my name on it. It's just a blank contract with all the, you know, things you would need to go through in a contract. So it talks about cover design and the fact that I am going to be traditionally published, so they will stand for the cost of, you know, production and publishing the book and getting it out to readers and everything like that. I was able to read that and go over it, and I had some questions about it and I asked them. And then there's a lot of back and forth, and I think the process of doing this is the same. I think it's a little bit different if you have an agent, because if you have an agent like in the US, I believe they go over the contract a lot more thoroughly than you can do yourself. In my case, I got a lot of help from especially my father. He is a lot better at reading contracts and he has read a lot of them throughout his years, so he was able to help me and help me understand. But I also had a lot of questions to the publishers, so the process will look kind of the same here with the back and forth. Then you can ask your questions, and I think a lot of publishers it's open to answer the questions, and my publishers were certainly in that. They have always been so helpful and nice and just welcoming from the beginning. And then when I had gone over it, I got back to them again and said that yes, I would like to sign the contract, and so we signed the contract, and that was that. So that is the process of, or my process of, sending my book to the publishers and then getting back from them, and how we got to the book deal eventually. So it's not that complicated, and I think the process will look same for most authors. That was the questions about the actual book deal, or how I got the book deal and the process of that. Then I have about the publishing. So one of the questions, which was actually from YouTube, is, do you know if your debut will be translated into English? And not right now. The publishing company that I have signed with is a only Swedish publishing company. Right now they are not looking into translating their works, but I think they are the fastest growing fantasy publishing house in Sweden, and so that can be something that they will look into in the future, but I think that will be many years ahead. As of now, no. And then I got a question about what part of the upcoming process are you most excited about and what are you most nervous about. So I will go over the exciting part first, and the thing that I'm most excited about is definitely maybe 2 or 3 month process coming up to the publication. And another thing that I'm really excited about is seeing my cover for the first time. That would be such an exciting time. And just being able to hold my book in my hands and maybe put it up behind me here on the bookshelf. That is definitely the most exciting part of it. And the most nerve-wracking part, and the thing that I'm most nervous about, is definitely getting the first reviews after the publication. And so getting those first reviews will be freaking nerve-wracking, and I'm looking forward to it, but I'm also kind of dreading it. How come that Set Off is my dream publishing house? And the reason for Set Off being my dream publishing house is because they are focusing a lot on fantasy. And in the Swedish book market, like if you want to publish a book in Sweden, it is difficult to publish a fantasy book for especially adults and young adults. The big houses in Sweden tend to translate a lot of English books into Swedish because that is doing really well for like the young adult section and also for the adult section. but they are not venturing into the Swedish author side of fantasy, and they are not publishing and promoting Swedish fantasy in the same way that they do English fantasy. But Seraph stood out in this. They go all in with the Swedish fantasy and they go all in supporting Swedish authors, but for me it was really important to be represented by a publishing house that supported my book and loved the fantasy element of it as much as I do. And so in conclusion, I chose Seraph because I know that they love fantasy as much as I do, and then I also love their covers because I am superficial like that. I'm vain like that. I love when books have beautiful covers, and when looking into the fantasy publishers, I immediately thought that they had the best covers, so I really wanted to be able to work with them, so that's that. And then I have some questions about Gods of Rot and Ruin. One question was, what is your favorite character or my favorite scene in the book? So my favorite character in the book, it would be wrong not to say my main character, Eden. I love Eden so much, and in many ways she is a part of me. I have put something of me in her, and some things in her journey is taken from myself. And so Eden will always have a very special place in my heart, since she's the main character and also a character that represents something very important to me. A lot of strength, independence, at the same time that she is very insecure. And I also love a side character in this book, Nikos. I think a lot of people who will read the book will love him as well, and that's all I'm gonna say. And am I really going to say another character? Yes, I'm going to. Corwin. She is a very important side character in the book, and you could say that she is Eden's sister. Even though they are not blood related, they are like sisters. She may have a very important role in the sequel to Gods of Rot and Ruin. And that's all I'm gonna say. And favorite scene in the book, it must be the last scene. I just finished, or I'm about to finish, revising or like going through the last couple of chapters again, and I am on that scene now and I love it so much. And then I have a question. How long did it take to finish this book? I have gone over this in the publishing announcement video, but the first draft took me about 3 months to finish, and then I had a decompression time when I was not touching the book or writing in it about 2 months. I edited the book until October 28th. October 28th was the time that I sent the book to the publisher. From March, I think, or February, March to October. How many months is that? Okay, so the whole of October, it is 8 months. Yeah, 8 months. I can't even count. It took me 8 months to finish this book. That is definitely not a lot of time. A part of your question was, and if someone had taken 18 years to work on their first book through trials, errors, and emotional problems, and decided to rewrite everything from a fresh start to make the story enticing in 2020, would you consider that to be a slow process to become a published author in progress? And then also thank you for the comment below. I feel like it's really dark. Should I like do something about that? But if it takes you 18 years to publish a book, it is a long time, but that doesn't make you any less of an aspiring author than other ones, and every author's way or progress or process of publishing a book is different. I would say don't feel discouraged about having written a book in 18 years, and don't feel discouraged about rewriting it, because I have a mindset that take the time that you need, however long that time may be, just take the time that you need. If it is 20 years or if it is 1 year, it doesn't really matter. Just do what works for you, and if that is rewriting the book that you wrote during 18 years, I would say that was a great choice of yours, and if you need to rewrite it again, you do so. I think it's very important to feel happy with the project. At the same time that I'm saying this, I also think it's important that if you feel stuck in your story, or if you feel like you can't go forward, I do think that it can be important to step away from your story and maybe write something different, or just gain some new perspective or information, and maybe try something new, write something new, or go about it a different way. I hope that answers your questions. I hope that you gained my perspective on this. And just to answer the final thing that you actually asked, if it's a slow process, I think it's a long period of time, but I don't necessarily think that it's a slow process, because if it works for you, then that's the way you have to do it, and that's that. So another question is, how did you get the idea for the book Gods of Rot and Ruin? This is a two-part answer. I got the idea for the magic system by seeing a beautiful tree in deep winter. I've said this a lot of times on my YouTube channel now, covered in frost and snow, and I thought about the world tree in Norse mythology, and I wanted to create a magic system surrounding that with different worlds. And the second answer is that I really wanted to see my own journey with like the structure of relationships and mental health. I really wanted to see that represented in the books that I read, and I hadn't found that. And so I wanted to write a book that I would want to read, if you know what I mean. So that is how Gods of Rot and Ruin came to be. I'm really excited for you guys to read it. Another question is there a character that was harder, or was it a character that was easier to write than you thought? And have they followed your plan, or have they done things on their own? The character that I definitely had a plan for in the beginning, that I thought that I knew, was my main character, Eden. She was a lot more manipulative and a lot more insightful in the events surrounding her than she ended up being in the book that is now. And so Eden did a lot of things that I did not initially plan. She had a lot of things to say about the things that I put her through. Yeah, she did not do as I planned in the first place. Is there a character that was easier or harder to write? So Eden, because of this, she was the hardest to write, but the easiest to write was probably either one of the two side characters that I just mentioned, Nikos and Carwin. Carwin has always been really easy to understand for me. She has this kind of cold anger inside for things happening to her in the past. I could visualize her really well, and the same with Nikos. He was also very clear in my mind how I wanted him to be. So I hope that answers your question. And then I have, what is the hardest and easiest with the process of, you know, creating Gods of Rot and Ruin? And the easiest was probably the drafting process. I don't know, that went really fast, and I ended up with a product that wasn't, you know, great, but it had the structure of a good story. And so that was the most fun and the easiest to do. And then the hardest thing is definitely the editing, with the focus on Eden's motivation. I had to strengthen up the motivation even now after being, you know, getting a contract on the book. That was the hardest thing for me. So then I just have one question about future plans and future books. So what can I reveal about future books in the same world or same series? And so what I can reveal is that it's going to be a 3-part series following side characters from the previous books. So in book 2 we will follow a side character from book 1, and in book 3 we will follow a side character from book 2. And what can I reveal about future books? In book 1 we get introduced to the different worlds, because this is kind of a portal magic system, and we get introduced to mainly 3 worlds actually, but not all the worlds. And so in book 2 we will see different places and a whole new cast of characters, and maybe a hot and steamy romance. I will need to include a romance in every book because I love having romance mixed with fantasy. The second book is going to be kind of murder mystery meets enemies to lovers meets marriage of convenience, maybe. So that's really all I can reveal about the following books. So then I have a lot of questions about the writing in general, like my writing process in general. So one of the questions is, how do I do mood boards? So I recommend you watching me creating a mood board for my nano project, which will be linked in one of these corners and also in the description below. But what I essentially do is I look up pictures on Pinterest and save them to a folder. And so I have a whole folder for like Gods of Rot and Ruin, and I have a whole folder for the sequel. And then I go into Canva and I create templates, and I picture down all the pictures that I want to have and switch them around and switch sizes and everything. How do you outline and how do you brainstorm? So I don't really brainstorm, but I will need to do that for the sequel to Gods of Rot and Ruin. So I will be posting a video about that in the following months. If I brainstorm, I just think about scenes that I want to be in the book. So for the Nano project, I actually did brainstorm. I thought about all the romantic tropes that I wanted to have in the book. I wrote them down, and I also wrote down how or which scene that would fit in or how that scene could look. And so that is how I brainstorm. But how I outline, I actually have a few videos about outlining up on my channel, and I will post a new outline with me video this upcoming year. I follow Abbie Emmons' 3-act story structure, and so I fill out the 3 acts and every plot beat that she has on that structure, and that is how I outline. I think about the beginning, I think about the middle and some plot twists in between and some scenes, like the most important scenes of the book, and I think about the ending. Then I try to piece it together like a puzzle. What is the most fun to write? So the most fun I have when writing is when I'm writing a fantasy and romance. That is the most fun thing, and definitely the banter and the back and forth between characters, that is the most fun. How do you organize Scrivener? So I have a whole video about organizing or setting up my Scrivener, and I will link that in one of these corners and also in the description. And I go over, not very thoroughly, I need to point out, but I do screen recordings and you can definitely see how I organize my Scrivener. But I organize through acts. So I have 3 acts. They are folders. So in those folders I have chapters. So you can see how many chapters are in Act 1 and how many chapters are in Act 2. And then I have folders on characters, and there I can put pictures as well of the characters. And I have folders on research and a lot of things that are already in Scrivener when you open it. So it's not that complicated, and you can definitely see a lot of it in the video, like I said. Then I have a similar question. What was the hardest thing to write? I don't know if this is pointed towards Ghosts of Rotten Ruin or in general, but I can answer in general what I think is the hardest to write. And the hardest things that I find writing is actually action sequences, battle scenes, or when something big is happening. So in the end of Ghosts of Rotten Ruin I have many part sequence or many chapter sequence, like the big climactic confrontation in the end is a scene separated in different chapters or a lot of chapters, and I found that part of the book really hard to write. Then I have a question about inspiration. So what do you do when you lose inspiration or lack the inspiration to write? And what do you do when you don't feel like writing? I haven't really come upon an instance when I do this. When it comes to, for example, schoolwork or writing, I am very disciplined on setting myself deadlines and writing this amount of words a day or writing this scene. I do my very best to complete those little goals along the way to finish the project. And so when the inspiration falters, I tend to just keep going anyway, because I have heard from a lot of writers that even if you don't have inspiration to write or if you don't feel like writing, a lot of times the best way you can keep going is to just sit down and write. And so that is a tip that I have taken to heart, and I have been trying to do that. So if I don't feel like writing this scene, I will sit down and do it anyway. But another tip that I have is to look at mood boards or go through Pinterest and try to find new pictures for your mood boards or your Pinterest board. I have done this a lot of times, especially my nano project, where I every day when I was going to write a scene, I looked up pictures that fit the scene or the sequence, and I would have them as a kind of background when I was writing. So I would get in the mood of writing the scene by looking at the pictures and finding them, then I would sit down and do it. Doing something that reminds you of the project and why you started it in the first place is my best advice here. For example, I will have to go through a lot of editing with Gods of Rotten Ruin, even though I have done quite some editing on it. So the motivation and inspiration to keep editing is lacking some days, and I don't really feel like doing it. But on those days, I need to remind myself why I'm doing this, and I need to visualize the end goal. And so I am one of those that has a lot of goals, and I am one of those that keeps track of them throughout the year and remind myself. That is my tip for you, and I hope that it helped somehow. How long have you been writing? So I have been writing on and off since I was 10 years old maybe. I started a Wattpad around that age and I wrote stories on there. I never finished any of them, but I did start 3 stories. One was Norse inspired, about a girl which was supposed to befriend wolves or a wolf pack. And then there was a story about an elven girl growing up in a human village, and her best friend was kidnapped and she was going to try to save him. Along this way she gets in touch with all her magical abilities and everything like that. And the last one was a dystopian or science fiction YA story about a girl working in the mines as a slave, and then this human-like race with advanced abilities, so stronger, faster, things like that, things that you have seen already in books. And there was a guy there that was kind of unsure of why he was on the side that he was on. It would become a love story between them, but I never got to that point. So I have been writing on and off since like 11 years old, but it wasn't until spring of 2020, early 2020, that I started writing, like actually wanting to finish a book. I started writing a book and got halfway through, like 53,000 words or something, and quit. I didn't know how to finish the book. And after that I started writing my first ever book that I finished, and I started writing that in the end of 2020, so November, December 2020. I do remember it was during Christmas time, and so I would say that early 2020 or 2020 in general was the year that I started writing and actually was able to finish a project. And the last question is it difficult to wait until 2023 for the book to be published? And it's not really difficult, I don't think so, because I will not be just sitting and waiting until then. I will be working on the book until its release date. It will be a hectic time, it will be difficult, and it will be fun. So the things that I'm really feeling is excitement and nervousness. So with that said, that was all the questions that you had asked, and I want to thank you so much for sending in questions on my Instagram and also on YouTube. I found it really fun to sit down and actually talk about this and talk about things that I haven't thought to mention on my YouTube channel yet. If you still have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!